Let's have a word of prayer as we start our study tonight. Dear God, thank you for this forum that we can get together. And God, we know that some of our people are missing tonight, but we know that they can have the chance to listen to it another time. So God, this is such a blessing. We ask now that you will guide us in our journey as we grow near the end of Acts. Help us to learn, help us to listen, help us to be blessed. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
All right.
Well, we hope we can hear Dottie because she's the one that gives me all the answers.
That's right, Dottie.
Dottie, are you still there?
I give you all the what?
Answers.
All the answers.
Plus, you give Molly a little bit of a run for her money, which is awesome.
Okay, well, we got you there. So we are in the book of Acts. And we were in chapter 27 and
Verse 27.
verse 27, because so Paul had just got there. They're in the boat. Where are they headed?
Rome.
They are headed to Rome. Why are they going to Rome?
See Caesar.
See Caesar.
Right, because Paul had
Paul appealed to Caesar.
So they had to take him because why did they have to take Paul? What was special about Paul?
Jewish.
He was.
That's not what this was about, though.
But he was a Roman citizen.
Roman.
A Roman citizen. He was a Roman citizen. He had the right to appeal. All right. So now they were trying to get to Rome before winter set in. Actually, they're trying to get to a better port before winter set in. And what happened?
Storm.
The storm.
Danger.
Okay. And they've thrown everything off that they can throw off. They have no food. They have no water. And what's the last thing that we hear from Paul as we ended last week?
He said, why didn't you listen to me? But I've heard from God and we will all survive.
We're all going to be survived. Okay. Well,
Way to go, Mayor Bear.
well, maybe. Let's see what happens. Okay. So let's go 27 through 38.
I'll read. On the 14th night, we were still being driven across the Adriatic Sea. When about midnight, the sailors sensed they were approaching land. They took soundings and found that the water was 120 feet deep. A short time later, they took soundings again and found it was 90 feet deep. Fearing that they would be dashed against the rocks, they dropped 4 anchors from the stern and prayed for daylight. In an attempt to escape from the ship, the sailors let the lifeboat down into the sea, pretending they were going to lower some anchors from the bow. Then Paul said to the centurion and the soldiers, "Unless these men stay with the ship, you cannot be saved." So the sailors cut the ropes that held the lifeboat and let it fall away. Just before dawn, Paul urged them all to eat. For the last 14 days, he said, you have been in constant suspense and have gone without food. You haven't eaten anything. Now, I urge you to take some food. You need it to survive. Not one of you will lose a single hair from his head. After he said this, he took some bread and gave thanks to God in front of them. Then he broke it and began to eat. They were all encouraged and ate some food themselves. Altogether, there were 276 of them on board.
Whoa.
When they had eaten as much as they wanted, they lightened the ship by throwing the grain into the sea.
All right. So they're in the storm. Now they took the sounding and I've got 20 fathoms. So they're definitely getting closer to shore. They can't see it because the shore, it's getting shallower. So why didn't they just sail into shore?
Rocks. They're gonna get smashed against the rocks.
Okay, the boat's gonna get smashed. So they anchor the boat as much as they can, and then they just sit there, just waiting for impending death. Now, these are seasoned sailors. And they know every time they go out to sea, they may not return. So they're scared to death. So what happens?
Paul says they need to eat.
Okay.
Some
People
of them
go-
are gonna try to escape.
Well, yeah, some of them think that they can make it to shore
Okay.
from a lifeboat with a lifeboat.
The crew is gonna abandon ship and leave the rest out to sea.
Say that again, Dan, a little louder.
The sailors, the crew that was gonna abandon the ship and leave everybody else out in the sea.
Yeah. They were. But what does that tell you about Paul's relationship with the crew? That scenario, the whole thing that was happening.
They must not have trusted him.
Wait,
But
wait.
they would really listen to him though. So he must have had that commanding presence.
He said, don't do that. And he said, stay and eat. And
They did stay.
Yeah, he said, if you don't stay, you're going to be lost. If you don't stay with the ship. And they did. They stayed. They sent the lifeboat out and they stayed with the ship. So that says that they were really trusting Paul.
Who was on the lifeboat? They
the
ne-
lifeboats, this crew, the ones, the sailors that were sailing the ship tried to get off the ship
Mhm.
on their own. They just were gonna take off and heck with everybody else.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the people that were running the ship thought, oh, we're getting off of here. It's going to smash. They're going to die. But when Paul said it, they listened to him.
Oh, so then they didn't get on the,
Right. They put the lifeboat over the side. The wind is blowing and the centurion, Paul says, if they don't stay, they're going to die. Centurion
Well, it says the soldiers cut the ropes. It doesn't necessarily mean that the sailors trusted him.
That's true.
I thought there were sailors on the ship when they cut the rope.
Yeah, I guess I did too until I reread that.
Yeah.
I thought there were,
Okay. All right. So it wasn't. So the sailors didn't trust Paul, but the centurion did.
Jeez.
Why do you think the centurion trusted Paul? I mean, these are seasoned sailors. They know the sea. They know what's going on. Why did he trust Paul?
Well, he had made other predictions that came true.
But he also did a lot of traveling himself.
I mean,
You know.
who did a lot of traveling?
Paul, so he
Paul.
actually knew that area.
Yeah. The centurion had been traveling with Paul for a while now. Does that help us to understand the relationship with Paul and the centurion?
yeah, I start trusting them if I were the centurion.
Yeah.
In our Bible, it says on for chapter 27, verse 31, it says, if the sailors had been allowed to desert the ship in seeking to save themselves, the passengers would have been unable to beach the ship the following day. So they must have not been on the ship, according to this commentary thing.
Wait, not on what ship?
The sailors on
Well,
the,
they had, if the sailors were off the ship, then the people wouldn't know how to do anything with the ship.
Right.
verse
Yeah.
30 says, without a port for the ship, the sailors felt their chance for survival was better in the single lifeboat, unencumbered by the many passengers. Then for the next verse, it says, if the sailors had been allowed to desert the ship in seeking to save themselves, the passengers would have been unable to beach the ship the following day. So it wasn't that the sailors trusted Paul, but they weren't allowed to go because the centurion must
Right.
have allowed them to go. So it was the centurion that trusted Paul,
Right.
but he didn't let the other ones to go because he knew they needed them to.
Okay. Well, either the centurion trusted Paul or knew that they needed the sailors, but I think it might have been some of both because the centurion had been traveling with Paul for a while. and saw the integrity of this man and saw what he had spoken. And you couldn't help but be touched by someone who really has the Spirit of God in him, and you see him working. Which reminds me, Nancy, as I went to see Alice yesterday, she asked how Alice was. And I said, you leave, walk away from talking with Alice and you feel like you've been in the presence of a saint. I mean, she really, there's just, the faith is so incredible, and her outlook on life and knowing what she's been through. And I think, and Paul had, if you're hanging around Paul for a while, you got to know there's something special about him. So this was a centurion. Okay. So the crew may not be happy. They think they're going to perish with everybody else now. But then this is really interesting what happens next. They haven't been eating for how long?
14 days. 14 days for the last
2 weeks.
Weeks.
2 weeks. These guys have got to be getting hungry. They still obviously had some food. Why did Paul want them to eat?
Well, it needed to be some strength if they're going to crash in on the beach and in the storm. And I don't know if they knew what they could have been landing in a place that wasn't civilized with no towns or people around there. So
Yeah, well, Paul said they're going to be shipwrecked. The ship is going to break apart, and you need a little bit of strength if you're in a storm and the ship is wrecked and you got to get to shore. Yeah, so they just felt better and they all ate.
And
Good.
he prayed before he ate.
What was it?
I said he prayed, didn't he? Thank God before he ate.
Yes.
And after he said this, he took some bread and gave thanks to God in front of them all. Then he broke it and began to eat.
And seeing that Paul wasn't worried and he was as a commanding presence, they all go, okay, might as well eat. Might as well stop worrying. All right. So we're all set for this ship to crash. Let's go 39 through 44.
I can read.
Okay.
When morning dawned, they didn't recognize the coastline, but they saw a bay with a beach and wondered if they could get to shore by running the ship aground. So they cut off the anchors and left them in the sea. Then they lowered the rudders, raised the foresail, and headed toward shore. But they hit a shoal and ran the ship aground too soon. The bow of the ship struck fast while the stern was repeatedly smashed by the force of the waves and began to break apart. The soldiers wanted to kill the prisoners to make sure they didn't swim ashore and escape. But the commanding officer wanted to spare Paul, so he didn't let them carry out their plan. Then he ordered all who could swim to jump overboard first and make for land. The others held onto planks or debris from the broken ship, so everyone escaped safely to shore.
Whoa. Okay, I'm letting Sue in. All right. Quite an adventure. All right. So they're trying to make this last ditch effort to get into shore, and they just didn't quite make it, and the ship is being pounded to death. They hit a sandbar or something, and the front of the ship is stuck. You got the picture. The back of the ship is going whap, 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 and the shores are just smashing it to pieces. Hi, Sue.
Hi, Sue.
All right, we're in chapter 27, and Paul's just been shipwrecked. Acts. So look at, it's obvious now that it's done. And there's probably going to be some lives lost, but they're close enough to shore that they may be able to get in. So what are let's get the right people in the right places. All right. What did the soldiers want to do before everybody went in?
Oh, the
And then
prison.
to kill the prisoners.
Why?
So they wouldn't escape.
Right. What would happen to the soldiers if their prisoners escaped?
They would be killed because they're responsible for them.
Right. So how would they explain the deaths of these prisoners?
Shipwreck.
Lost in the storm, drowned.
Yeah, no
They drowned.
problem. Got the bodies. They were shipwrecked. We were shipwrecked. They died in the shipwreck. Nobody escaped. So now we see, we told you before how the centurion had this thing for Paul, and now we see it for sure. The centurion wants to save Paul's life. So the only thing he can do is not let them kill any of the prisoners, because he couldn't pick Paul out. So how many people were on the ship?
270.
76. I know, I was surprised with that number. Going, whoa, I didn't realize there were so many.
Big boat, ship. It's a big ship. And apparently Paul is not the only prisoner. There's a bunch of them that are all going to Rome, and we've got the centurions. So I am going to go on ahead since we got so much time, and we're probably going to finish, but the next week we're going to talk about what happened to Paul after Acts is done. So
Okay.
we'll finish the story.
Tells us that he doesn't die on the end of the chapter. Well, ruined the ending.
I won't be a spoiler. Okay, so let's see what happens when on Acts 28, 1-6.
I can read that.
Okay.
Once safely on shore, we found out that the island was called Malta. The islanders showed us unusual kindness. They built a fire and welcomed us all because it was raining and cold. Paul gathered a pile of brushwood and, as he put it on the fire, a viper, driven out by the heat, fastened itself on his hand. When the islanders saw the snake hanging from his hand, they said to each other, "This man must be a murderer, for though he escaped from the sea, justice has not allowed him to live." But Paul shook the snake off into the fire and suffered no ill. The people expected him to swell up or suddenly fall dead, but after waiting a long time and seeing nothing unusual happen to him, they changed their minds and said he was a god.
Ooh,
Yes.
Paul once again goes through another trial. So what kind of faith do these inhabitants of Malta have, do you think?
Did you say what kind of snake?
What kind of were the inhabitants of the island? What kind of faith
Oh,
they have? Yeah.
I was going to say they have vipers.
Jews and they weren't Christians.
They weren't Christians. They weren't Jews. And so a primitive people, a lot of people, well, people still had superstitions. So what did they think about Paul?
If a snake went and he was a murderer because the snake grabbed onto his arm. So that was a symbol of murderers.
Well, why was that why did they think he was a murderer? I mean, why would that have been it? Because the snake bit him. What was going on there?
Their god or gods were making sure that he was punished and couldn't escape.
Okay, so there was a shipwreck and he didn't die, but then whatever gods are going, no, this one needs to die. So he must have done something really, really wrong if this snake came out and bit him. So there's also some other thing, but what happened to Paul?
Even though it was probably poisonous, he didn't die.
He didn't
I'm
die.
assuming
So God had his back again.
Caught his back again. It may not have been poisonous. We don't know. I mean, he dropped it. I mean, can you see it biting it? And now what would I do if I was bitten by a snake and it's hanging off my hand?
Right.
I wouldn't have remained too cool. I hate
But,
snakes.
but the
That's me.
Islanders were watching him have that snake. They would know that it was poisonous, or they wouldn't have thought much of it, would they?
I don't know, but this commentary says there was a snake that looked like the viper, but wasn't.
Oh,
And it might have been that, like, there's a difference between,
Dottie, it wasn't a miracle.
now, you know,
throw
now,
that commentary out.
throw the commentary out.
Yeah.
It says,
So-
Yeah, that doesn't.
okay, read this now. It says, nowadays, there is no such thing as a poisonous snake in Malta. On the island of Malta, there's no poisonous snakes.
Got rid of them after that.
And in Paul's time, there was a snake very like a viper, but quite harmless. It's probably likely that Paul shook off the snake before it had time to pierce his skin. In any event, he seemed to have handled the whole affair as with a little account. Okay. So who knows what really happened there?
Dottie, what do you think?
I don't know. I was answering the phone.
Okay.
Oh,
Was it
nice.
God?
A likely
my excuse
story, a
next
likely,
time.
likely story. Now, if we can explain it scientifically, does that mean it's not a miracle?
Not in my mind.
Okay. Anybody else have a thought on that?
I think if he could make it to shore like he did, then, that was probably a miracle. So the snake's just a little bit more of on the miracle.
Okay. Have you ever heard the saying that, let me think where it was, coincidence. It's about a coincidence. Oh yeah, a coincidence, it's God's way of remaining anonymous. Have you ever heard that?
Yes, you did say that one. Okay.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So, yeah, maybe this wasn't a poisonous snake. Maybe as soon as it was there, Paul threw it off and the thing didn't get to clamp on and get his venom in it. Who knows? But what was the effect on the local people?
And they believed he was not a murderer because he was able to, not die from the shipwreck nor from the snake. I gotta go get a Kleenex. I'll be back.
Okay. In fact, he wasn't a murderer. They thought now that what?
He was God.
It's the God.
God. He was a god. See, these miraculous things happen.
Now, Molly, the people knew that these snakes were poisonous because that was their reaction.
Yeah.
So I think that whoever that commentator guy that wrote that, he didn't take that into account, the people's reaction there, that they were living there. They definitely thought it was poisonous. And
Okay.
they'd be, most used to their
It's
their
true.
land.
It's true.
And people in Malta aren't going to be, people that live there aren't probably going to go all over the place. I agree with you, Sue.
Okay.
I also think, they knew he was a prisoner. So the fact that he was attacked by a snake automatically made oh my God, he must be bad.
Gods are out to get him. Yeah.
And
Okay.
the other thing is, I learned this when I was in about 5 years old in Sunday school. So it's got to be true.
Yeah, you got to trust those Sunday school teachers.
I didn't say it's not true. I'm just saying, if we could explain it, does that make it less of a miracle?
All I can say is, Sue, I'm impressed that you remembered something when you were 5 years old. That's a miracle.
Okay. Well, anyways, all of the people made it. The storm must have been somewhat past because people who are non-swimmers were able to get to shore hanging onto a plank. That must have been,
Been a miracle too, because, yeah, I think that's just as much a miracle as the other things.
I think to me, that's the biggest miracle of all. Because being, I was a lifeguard when I was young, and I've watched people who don't know how to swim
Mhm.
get into water, and the terror of getting into the water. And they're getting into the water in the middle of a storm, holding on to a plank. And somehow or other, not one of them panicked and drowned. That to me is the biggest miracle of all, that they all made it to shore safely. Every one of them. Even those darn sailors who were going to abandon everybody, they all made it safely to shore. Now, there's another piece in this. How did he get the bite in the first place of the snake?
They were building a bonfire.
Okay.
What was it? Part of the wood that's left over from the wreckage of the boat? Or were they doing that just to get warm?
Oh, well, it said it was raining. So it said that, didn't it say the company they were making a fire?
Yeah.
They
that's
made
right.
the fire.
It was
He was
cold and rainy.
gathering an armful of sticks and was laying them on the fire. A poisonous snake driven out by the heat bit him.
So what does that tell us about Paul?
He attracted snakes.
You like to build fires.
Was he sitting around and doing nothing while everybody else was working, or while people were working?
You know, he was a good Boy Scout. He went out and gathered wood and made the fire, and
He was not above any, he could do whatever was needed at the time. He wasn't in anything bigger than, even though he was this preacher that traveled and started all these churches, he could do the manual labor just as well as anyone else. No problem with that. All right. So let's go to number Acts 28, 11 through 15.
No, we
7.
stopped at 7.
Let's start 7 then. Yep, I jumped ahead. 7 through 10.
I can read again. There was an estate nearby that belonged to Publius, the chief official of the island. He welcomed us to his home and for 3 days entertained us hospitably. His father was sick in bed, suffered from fever and dysentery. Paul went in to see him and after prayer, placed his hands on him and healed him. When this had happened, the rest of the sick of the island came and were cured. They honored us in many ways, and when we were ready to sail, they furnished us with the supplies we needed. Where did you want me to go, to 16?
Right there, that's it. All right, the first question I have is, how big was this house?
They all 276 went there. It was a big house.
And that's what I am wondering. He said it welcomed us and hospitably entertained us for 3 days.
I think it was Paul and Luke and a few others, but I don't think it was 276 of them.
Well, they could have camped on the grounds around the estate, most of them.
Yeah. Yeah, how big is Malta?
Oh, about that big on our map.
Yeah, about this big. It's a pretty big island. It's one of the,
Mine.
South Sicily.
anybody got a thing that says how big Malta is?
Mm,
Did it say something?
I'd look it up on my phone, but David has it right now.
Malta, how big is Malta? I can do that.
How big is Malta?
I'm thinking it had to be big because I'm reading it had excellent harbors and was ideally located for trade. So a lot of people went there.
It was
It's
58 miles.
122 miles squared.
Okay. So it's not real small.
Oh,
Bigger than Randolph.
it is 17 miles long and 9 miles wide with a total area of 246 square kilometers or 95 square miles.
Okay. So bigger than Jamestown. I mean, it's a big place. So so maybe they did. Maybe they all kind of camped out there. And this guy said, hey, we got people, 270 some people. Let's feed them. For how long? And Dottie, did you say something?
Pardon?
Did you say something?
I said nothing. I answered the door.
Oh,
Now
okay.
Catherine comes to the Bible study with us.
Oh, okay. All right. So they're there. How long are they at the estate?
3 days.
3 days.
Days. Okay. And Paul uses the gift that he has for healing.
Yeah, but here, you know.
And imagine what it was like for Paul the next couple of days.
Read the Bible.
Mhm.
Okay, have any of you ever been on a mission trip where you do a medical mission? Sue, this is a question for you.
Oh, yes, I have.
Yes. Tell them about the time you went up to the mountain and you couldn't do the medical mission.
Paul was just shipwrecked. Oh, and they're on an island now.
There was,
They made it
once they
close.
found out there was a clinic going on, when we came back the next day, there was mobs of people and it wasn't even safe for us to do the clinic. There were so many people trying to get in line and get seen by the doctor.
Everybody was
So you had to just turn around and go home
Yep.
because the people just mobbed in thinking there was going to be a doctor, someone that could heal them. So here is this place and there's this person that healed this man who was definitely sick. So there's a line ringing around the whole island. People are coming. So Paul and healed them all. Healed them all. Wow. All right. So now we're going to get him to Rome. Now we're on 11 through 15.
Is that 28?
28, chapter 28, 11 through 15.
Okay. You want us to read?
Okay, go ahead.
After 3 months, we put out to sea in a ship that had wintered in the island. It was an Alexandrian ship with the figurehead of the twin gods Castor and Pollux. We put in at Syracuse and stayed there 3 days. From there, we set sail and arrived at Rhegium. The next day, the south wind came up, and on the following day, we reached Puteoli. Thanks a lot. There we found some brothers who invited us to spend a week with them. And so we came to Rome. The brothers there had heard that we were coming, and they traveled as far as the Forum of Appius and the 3 taverns to meet us. At the sight of these men, Paul thanked God. We have to turn the page. And was encouraged. When we got to Rome, Paul was allowed.
Okay, you can stop there. We're not going to get to Rome quite yet.
Okay.
All right, so it sounds like the rest of the trip was rather boring after the first part. And they just went the usual way. They had an Alexandrian ship. Let's see, that might have been better. How long did they stay on Malta?
3 days.
3 months.
3 months. They were
Oh.
3 months in Malta. Okay. So this is the ship had the carving of the figurehead. So these Greek gods on it. This time the voyage was as prosperous as the previous one had been disastrous. And Puteoli is the port of Rome. So now who is coming to meet Paul when he got to Rome?
3 brothers.
Okay.
Mhm.
So what does that mean? Were these Paul's brothers?
They were the Christians coming to see him.
The who?
Wasn't it?
This says the good news had spread to Rome in various ways. Many Jews who lived in Rome would visit Jerusalem for religious festivals, and some had been present at Pentecost, had believed in Jesus, and had brought the message back to Rome.
All
By the
right.
time Paul arrived, the letter to the Romans had already been written and received by the believers there.
All right. So all of Paul's hard work throughout these years of his 3 missionary journeys, now he's reaping a little benefits of himself, because now some of the followers of Christ are there to meet him, whether they knew him personally or not. They knew of him, and now he wasn't going to have to face what was ahead alone. He had friends there. And I'm still wondering when it says we, if it's this whole 275 people, or if there's certain, it doesn't really explain what happened to the other prisoners. And is Paul able to travel by himself? Or we don't know. We just know he's at Rome with the people that he traveled with, and now he's met believers that are in Rome itself.
Mhm.
Now, when I was in college, I went to Houghton College, and we would travel on our spring break. We would go on tour. And so we'd bring the wind ensemble. I played French horn, and we'd travel around, and we wouldn't play at schools or anything. We would always play at churches. And then we would go and stay overnight at various homes. And some of you that are musicians may have done that. You stay in people's homes. They can't do that nowadays anymore, but we used to stay in lots of different homes. And no, it's nice when you're traveling with Christians that you just have an automatic brotherhood. You got, okay, we have a basic belief that these people that we've never met before, we have something in common. So I think there's Paul, and he says, okay, I'm coming to Rome. I'm probably facing death. We don't know. But he meets some believers, and it's a very happy time. So any comments on this so far? I think we'll wait till next week to finish it up. So what kind of trials has Paul been through in this book of Acts? Listen,
Well, he's been
everything that's been difficult.
Threatened death.
He's what?
He's been threatened death by,
Okay. He's had death threats against him. What else has happened to Paul?
Well, the shipwreck,
He had the shipwreck. Okay, he was shipwrecked.
the snake bite.
Snake bite. That's just our most recent ones. What else has happened to him?
But he seems to be run out of every city because for his safety.
Run out of every city. He gets, somehow he seems to be in the middle of every controversy, and he just barely escapes. What else has
he
happened
sort
to
of
him?
stirs that up.
He sort of stirs it up. Yeah. He's not Barnabas.
Are you asking us to go through the whole book of Acts?
Yeah. Everything that he's been through in Acts. What things has he been through?
Well, he had to get his hair cut.
Right. He had to shave his head.
He was killing Christians to start with, and then he ended up being a Christian. And he
Yeah.
got,
But I'm saying, what trials did he go through? What trials?
Oh, he was blinded for a while.
He was blinded for a while. Yep.
Right.
Oh,
right.
that's major. Yeah.
Mhm.
Before Felix, before Festus.
Yep. He went before Roman tribunals. What else?
Well, a couple times the crowds overwhelmed him so much that they had to, didn't the Roman soldiers kind of have to rescue him?
Right. Okay. He had to be escorted out of the city, surrounded by like how many 400 and some soldiers had to escort him out. Okay. What else happened to Paul?
Well, he's under house arrest for a long time.
All right. Under house arrest.
Had a falling away with his friend Barnabas.
Had a falling out with Barnabas. Yep. Good friend. Had a argument with them where they went separate ways. You're missing a couple key things that were really, really big trials. He was stoned and left for dead. Forgot that.
Oh,
And-
that's right.
Yep, he was stoned and left for dead. And he also was beaten. 39 lashes, which means that was 40 was death. So he was beaten to an inch of his life. He's gone through quite a bit, hasn't he?
For sure.
Yeah. And yet there he was on the shore, just picking up brush along with everybody else. He's endured all of these things. And it just, that's why we talked about that he couldn't have been a small person. He would have had to have been strong and muscular to have been able to handle all of this. And he had to have been very healthy to be able to gone through all this.
Didn't he have some ailment that he asked God to take away?
That's not in Acts, but yes, it is. He had, we don't know what it was. There was 3 times. That's in the book of 2 Corinthians, chapter 1, where he asked God to take away this trial that he had 3 times. And God says, no, my strength, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. So he had some kind of something, thorn in his flesh is what he called it.
Some
Right, so
thought it was eyesight.
Yeah, we often think it's his eyesight because there's several hints to it that he writes big. You can see, I wrote this in my own hand. You can see how big the letters are. There's another couple hints. I just found something in Galatians talking about his poor eyesight. So
With Corinthians, is it assumed that he wrote the Corinthians when he was in prison for those 3 years? Or do we know that?
I don't know. I know he wrote to the Corinthians. There may, in the 1st and 2nd Corinthians, there may actually be 3 letters. So he definitely wrote to them that they were doing a lot of things wrong. And then he wrote to them a time later. So I don't know whether it was in the 3 years that he was under house arrest that things got better or not. So Paul is a pretty amazing character. He has faith enough to pray and to convince a whole shipload of people, 276, to just relax and they're all going to be saved. What was that? I can't hear you, Nancy.
Don't ask again.
Okay. All right. So next week we are going to finish up chapter 28 and I'm going to do some research and let you know
No.
some of the things of Paul after the book is over. So we're going to finish up next week. And so anybody got any questions or comments on Paul this week with the book of Acts?
But he had quite an adventurous life. Oh,
He surely did.
yeah.
And I'm trying to think, they've made a lot of movies of Bible characters, but I don't ever recall there being a movie of Paul. It just seems like it would be such a great movie. or Paul, the musical. Maybe I should do it. Maybe I
Yeah,
should-
just like Sight and Sound Theater, because I just saw Esther.
Yeah,
Yesterday, and it would be a good one for them to do.
Paul would be great.
Yeah.
Be a great one. Now, okay. Well, I'm gonna turn us off then, and we'll go to our, I don't have my mouse plugged in. All right, so I'm stopping recording.